Hello everybody, how's it going today? Glowplasma231 here, back in today to talk about Kagurabachi, chapter number 62. This chapter is titled Iori, and this chapter title is a very good chapter title for Kagurabachi because it is titled Iori, and as we will learn inside of this chapter, Iori is the name of Samura's daughter, of course, Iori Samura. Granted, she's not known as that in the present sort of scenario, because of course, she's not called Samura because she's dead and been faked to death, but she is living with her mom, as we'll get to, so it's a little bit of like a confusing thing about what actually happened with her. Does her mom have all the original memories of her and Samura, or is this even her original mom? We really have no clue about anything when it comes here to Kagurabachi and Iori's background yet, but of course, this is really the first chapter that she is a part of. Of course, she was introduced last chapter on like halfway through it, and then it's like, okay, yes, Samura had a daughter. She is our leverage that we will be using here. And then this chapter is where we actually get in sort of inside of her conscience and learn what particularly really makes her click. And that's something I actually really like about this chapter. I don't think this chapter is without flaws, as we will be getting into a bit later on, but I really love the school-bound aesthetic that gets brought up here, and I really like Iori as the character that we get characterized here during this chapter. But of course, before we can talk about this chapter of Kagurabachi, I need to briefly mention what happened last time in Kagurabachi. And last time we had, of course, as I mentioned, an entire chapter where the Masumi, of course, went through and talked to Chihiro about, hey, here's what we're going to do, here's what our plan is to thwart Samura, being that we want to just talk to him, understand why he's thinking about doing all of this. And to do this, we need to go after his daughter. And if we go out of his daughter, which is also something that Hishaku's probably trying to do, we can sort of meet them in the middle and have both Samura and the Hishaku deadlocked behind what our actions that we are about to take by getting Iori and putting her in sort of our protective custody as this sort of goes on here. And there's a lot of sort of banter back and forth between all of them until the big thing at the end of the chapter was like, we met two new Hishaku members, one named Kugiri and another who is unnamed at this point, but the female partner of Kugiri. Sort of like a short woman with like some white frizzly hairs, it sort of seems, but of course, being that everybody's hair is either black or white in manga, to me, it looks like it's either going to end up being like a blonde of some sort or definitely a white of some sort, because I think either would look good for this type of character that Takeru Hokuzono, of course, the author of Kagurabachi, is trying to go for here. And the big reveal is we met these two, and everybody's going to Kyoto, where Iori is sitting in school, and that was the end of last chapter. And we open this chapter up pretty succinctly with Iori Samura, or just Iori as we know her at this point, we don't know what last name she's currently going by, sleeping in her room before her alarm goes off to wake her up for school, of course. And we see that she's having this little bit of a dream of some figure in her life who we will learn as this chapter goes on is Samura, holding her young hand and just saying, hey, Iori, right? So it does seem that Iori was her original name, and just her last name being that Samura has changed, because of course that makes a good amount of sense, right? But we see that Iori's alarm goes off, and she's like completely hidden under all of her covers, which I feel so much. I mean, at this point, I don't think I wake up any morning without having a blanket thrown over my head of some sort, but like just being bundled up into warmth underneath it, right? But Iori's like, oh, not yet. As we see that she gets up out of bed and heads into the kitchen of her house, where she says good morning to her mother, right? And her mother just is like, hey, good morning, did you sleep well, Iori? And Iori's just like, and her mom just says, okay, come on, is that a yes or a no? Now, this woman definitely looks very similar to Iori, so if I had to guess, this is Iori's mother and Samura's ex-wife, presumably, but we don't know anything else besides for this little bit of a fact besides, hey, this is who she is. We don't know much else about her, pretty much, right? We don't know if she knows the whole situation or what her deal with Samura currently is, if she even knows that Iori is Samura's daughter. But as Iori just like goes into a little bit of narration, just saying, hey, that's my mom. My dad left before I was born, and mom raised me all by herself. And a little bit of an interesting thing to note is the note of like, hey, my mom raised me all by herself is written in a much bigger text font than the first line of like, hey, my dad left me before I was born. So, of course, Iori does not know about her past, which makes sense, because if I'm not mistaken, last chapter they said this happened 3 years ago, or 3 years ago to close to today, whenever Iori died, pretty much. But we see while Iori is sitting down and eating some breakfast her mom prepared her, we see on the little television set in the room, The announcer just goes, and bring you this news right now. At a kabuki performance yesterday on the afternoon of the 9th, an attacker killed multiple people. And we see that on the screen is, of course, the theater. I don't know why I always forget the word theater when I think every single time I've brought up this theater where Chihiro and Hirohiko fought, I have completely forgotten the name of what that building is called. It's a theater, right? Where we see the kabuki performance. The Battle of Sano Island was playing, and we see that Chihiro is standing there over a lot of dead bodies, which are all the Hishaku members who he very much killed there, right? And we see that Iori's mom's just like, man, that's absolutely terrible. And Iori's just like, oh, gosh, it's gruesome. And she just goes like, oh, like, it's terrible, right? And we eventually see that, like, she tells her mom, like, hey, I'll have a good day. Hope you have a good one, too, right? As Iori goes outside to head to school, right? And we see on the way to school, she meets one of her friends. This is another unnamed character. I'm just going to be calling her Iori's friend. She's a bit of like a minor character in this chapter, somebody who gets brought up a few amount of times. Not brought up, but is just sort of around into conversation. And we see that Iori just goes on a little bit of more narration about her life, pretty much, right? And she says, like, yeah, it was just an ordinary morning, except that violence was on the rise. And 3 days earlier, a weird thing had blocked out the sky. Of course, talking about the owl, which is a terrifying, like, thing to think about. Like, oh my gosh, these people are going around in their daily lives with this owl face just looming at them over, in the sky, just looking down at over them. And, like, it's blocked out the sun, it's done everything. That is just incredibly weird, right? And she just says, like, hey, and of course, when it first showed up, there was a massive fuss. And for 2 days, they completely canceled school. As we see that Iori walks into the classroom, takes a seat at her desk, and everybody's just like, hey, long time no see, right? And just, like, doing all of those, like, formalities, like, hey, we haven't seen each other in a while. That's pretty cool, you know what I'm saying, right? As we eventually see that her teacher gets up to the front of the class, just says like, all right, guys, welcome back to class, all that sort of jazz, right? He says like, hey, the Kamunabi has reported that it's not dangerous, that thing up in sky, so we will end up resuming classes here for a day, right? And one of the kids in the front row is just like, what do you mean it is dangerous? We can't do sports, which is like, come on, man. I think your least of your worries is going to be going out and playing football or soccer or American football, whatever you're playing outside, tennis. I don't know what the Japanese school kids play, or are they doing their kendo matches or anything? But we just see a lot of ruckus in the classrooms. Feel like, wow, the Kamunagi, man, sorcerers are really freaking. Like, hey, what's their deal anyway, right? And Iori just finishes off her narration for the moment, just going, hey, other than that, things were pretty much normal. Nothing but. As we see one of her classmates who sits at the desk to the right of Iori suddenly just is like, no, this world is over. That is what that thing in the sky means. As we see that Iori's friend turns around, of course, she sits in front of Iori in this classroom, just like, man, dude, Ikora, you're a real ray of sunshine. As we see that Iori just is like, hey, Ikora, what's on your face? As we see that on the side of Ikora's face, it's a few lines drawn in like a permanent marker of some kind, right? As, of course, this is on the left side of his face, and there's one running up from about where his mouth is up to his hairline, and then one running from his ear up to his brow, and one running just under his eye to the bottom of his ear. And what this is very resemblant of Chihiro's scar, right? And Ikora even says that just in like, oh, it was there whenever I woke up this morning, right? And Iori's friend's just like, hey, we all get what you're doing, Ikora. You're imitating that guy who attacked a kabuki performance, aren't you, right? And he's like, it's part of my mission. And Iori's friend's just like, dude, just give it up. None of us actually care. And Ikora just continues like, very soon our lives will be turned upside down, and the fate of the world will be in my hands. And Iori's friend's just like, golly, Ikora, you're a moron. All boys are stupid. Like, get off your high horse here, right? But she also just says, like, hey, that guy who attacked that kabuki performance, he was pretty young, and he was around our age, wasn't he? Like, honestly, he was kind of badass. And Ikora just goes, like, yeah, he definitely was. And Iori's like, okay, so you are just copying him. And I love how Iori finally gets a moment and just like, dude, Korok, what are you actually doing? And she just says, like, hey, that guy's a murderer, and that's just really, really messed up. And that eventually, I guess, goes through Ikura's mind as he just, like, holds up his hand and just wipes off the marker. I guess it's like an expo mark or something he can just sort of, like, rub off the way he's doing it. Because, like, yeah, he just moves his hand on the side of his face, and all of a sudden, like, all of it's just completely gone, right? And as Ikura's doing this, Iori sort of just, like, passes out on her desk almost, as she sort of, like, reaches her arms forward and, like, stretches and just, like, leans on the desk completely, and she's like, oh, I'm so tired, right? As we see her friend's just like, hey, so I guess you could sleep again, and she's like, yeah, tell me about it, right? And Iori's friend just says, like, hey, did you have that same dream again? And Iori's like, yeah, I did, but I can't remember it. As we get this image in this moment of a lock. Of course, this is a lock with 4 chains sort of stretching out on each side and are locked inside of the lock's area. I know I said lock a bunch of times there. My bad, right? But Iori's friend just is like, hey, did you really dream about that? And she's like, yes, it's definitely something important. I just don't particularly know what it is. But this is the first time this dream has ever happened 3 days in a row. And her friend says, like, oh, so you're telling me it started up 3 days ago? I mean, that's when the sky got all weird, isn't it? And Iori's just like, yeah, I honestly wonder if it's sort of connected in some way, right? And of course, overhearing all of this, Ikura just is like, yeah, it's definitely a sign that you've been chosen too. And Iori's just like, a sign? Like, what do you mean, Ikura, right? And Iori's friend is like, hey, Ikura, shut up, would you, right? But Ikura just says, like, hey, lots of things can cause insomnia, like stress. And Iori's friend's like, so you're suddenly all, like, scientific on all of this stuff, right? But Ikura's just like, hey, or it could be if something is bothering you, right? And Iori's friend just says, like, hey, well, duh, there's something bothering all of us out there. I mean, it's stressing me out, stressing everybody in this classroom out, and, like, hey, the sun's blocked out. Like, that's a big downer, right? And it's like, yeah, how is everybody going to get their vitamin D, if I'm not mistaken? Isn't vitamin D the one that comes from the sun? I actually sort of need to look that up now. What vitamin and mineral comes from sun? Vitamin D, I was right there. Look at that. I know a few things besides for Kagurabachi in this brain of mine. But Iori just, like, looks out the window and just is like, yeah, but really, what's up with the sky? As she looks out the window and sees the owl's gaze just looking back down at her. And she has this flash in her mind again of her holding the hand of someone much, much older than her in this moment. And of course, we as the audience can tell, it is none other than Samura. As we see, like, Samura's signature coat, like his shirt not buttoned up at all, and, like, we just see the front of it sort of hang loose, and his little scraggly beard that he's got going there, right? As we get an image of this lock again, as we see one of the 4 chains has suddenly snapped. As we see that this really resonates with Iori all of a sudden, as even her friend can sort of, like, tell him, like, hey, Iori, is everything okay, right? And Iori's just like, what was that? And she's like, hey, what if the sky is having, like, some kind of weird effect on me all of a sudden? And, like, what if it's just only on me? As, her friend's just like, hey, that's, dude, I think you're just letting all of Ikura's, like, baloney just, like, freak you out all of a sudden, right? And I love how Ikura's just like, yeah, you want to join the battle? And I love how Iori's just got this expression about, like, golly, forget I said anything about any of this, right? As her friend just goes like, hey, well, it's natural that people are all freaking out, so let's go get something sweet after school. And Iori's like, yeah, I think that would be pretty much some good fun. As she notices something out of the corner of her eye, because of course she sits right next to the window at school, and as she looks out the window, she sees this guy sort of dressed in a very weird way, standing at the school's gate. And she looks down at it, and of course, we know this character, it is none other than Kugiri. As he's standing there, and we see a school attendant walks up, and we don't get any dialogue from him, but I bet he's like, hey, dude, what are you doing here? This is, some school property, like, I don't know if you should be snooping around here, mister, it doesn't look like you a kid who goes here, I mean, you aren't late for school, are you, right? And, like, he's walking up to Kugiri, and Kugiri just, like, takes out a sword, and just knocks the guy on the ground, and Iori just sees this man's blood pool out from under his body. As all of a sudden she just yells, get down! as everybody in our room sort of gets down as the window completely shatters open. As we see that Kagiri has jumped up to this window, presumably on the second or third floor. We don't really know for sure, but the way that it looks to Iori, it looks like it's at least a second floor. It may be a third, but I'm guessing second floor, so I don't think Kagiri's, like, leap up is really that impressive, all things considered here, right? But Kagiri just hops up and says, like, hey, what year is this class, right? And somebody just says, like, hey, second year, right? And Ikura just says, like, oh, second year, bingo, right? As we see that Iori's been hurt a little bit, and Ikura's just like, hey, Iori, is everything okay? As Iori sort of just, like, holding her arm because she got sort of very much hurt there, right? As Kagiri just says, like, hey, I'm looking for Samura. What class is she in, right? And Iori just thinks, Samura? Who is Samura, right? As we see that Kagiri's partner, the female Hishaku sorcerer, who I'm going to be needing to give a temporary name to, because we still don't know her name either, which is like, really, come on now, right? But she walks into the room and just like, come on, Kagiri, you know she wouldn't be using that name currently, and like, hey, all the photos we have are already altered. Like, it's honestly a little pointless to ask. As she walks further into the room and just is like, as Kagiri's just like, hey, what are you talking about? So, like, how do we actually find her? As we see that, his partner just walks in and just, like, says, like, well, like I said, and she sticks a finger in one of the classmates' shoulder. And, of course, she gets some blood that is on this, girl's shoulder, right? And she just says, like, hey, we have Samura's blood, so we just need to find the one that tastes the same. As she takes their finger and she licks the blood, just as like, oh, it's not this one right here, right? As we see that Kagiri's just like, okay, but that'll literally take forever, right? And we see this partner's just like, okay, so what we do then is we get all of the kids together into one place, and like, hey, no killing the girls, because they could only be our only target here, right? As we eventually see that Iori's just like, what in the world is like legitimately going on here? As Ikura actually stands up in the classroom and says like, hey, what are you talking about? You're going to go through and kill all of these people? And like, hey, you could have killed somebody by smashing through all of that glass here, right? And you're just like, oh, damn it, Ikura, what are you actually doing? If they find a Samura person, they'll leave. And he's like, that idiot's just trying to act so cool. They're going to kill him, right? As she remembers the person who got killed outside the window that Kagiri had killed at the gate, pretty much, right? And Kagiri just turns to his partner, just like, hey, that means we can kill the boys, right? And she just says, yeah, of course we sure can. As we see that Ikura suddenly, like, gets wide eyes, like, oh crap, what have I actually done here? We see Iori's friend, the teacher, and everybody else just like, oh my gosh, what's going on here? And Kagiri brings out his blade and gets ready to swing it down on Ikura, as all of a sudden, Iori jumps out of her seat, pushes Ikura back, and holds the blade up from where Kagiri is standing, right? And we see that the blade is pressed up right against her cheek in this moment, right? As we see that Ikura's able to be like, oh, Iori, right? As this happens, we see that Kagiri's just remembers like, hey, no killing girls, and she's like, wow, she really trusted that I wouldn't kill these girls enough to actually jump in. As he's like, man, you've actually got guts, kid, right? And Ikura's like, Iori, why are you doing this? And Iori's just like, hey, thanks for standing up for us, Ikura, but seriously, cut it out. You are going to die, right? As we see that Kagiri's like, hey, partner, come over here and check her blood, right? And like, hey, if she's not Samura's daughter, I can kill her after all of this. As we see that she's just there, and she's like, oh no, it's actually over now. I'm not this person, and like, this isn't great. Why is this happening? Why is this happening to me? Like, no, like, oh, this isn't good, right? As all of a sudden, we see the head of the Kawinagi, whose name we now know is Ro. The names are actually revealed in the next chapter, but being that I'm recording this video a little late, we already know the name, so this is Ro. He walks in and just is like, hey, excuse me, everybody. As all of a sudden, we see that Chihiro has also entered the room, and we see that he has a blade pressed up right against Kagiri's neck. Now, the blade that Chihiro is using here, I'm honestly having a hard time figuring out if this is the intent or not. Because, of course, The second the intent is being used, of course, the owl in the sky will detect it, and being that the best guess is that it is an enchanted blade detector right now, Samura is going to come through and be like, oh, no, I know where you are, right? And then come and do something about Chihiro. So I honestly can't tell if this is the intent or not, or do the enchanted blades, as long as you don't use any of their special powers, do they still shoot off that signal of sorcery? It's something that we don't quite know, and it'd be cool, because why I'm saying this is the hilt definitely looks like Intent's hilt, but we don't, or the sword guard blade, whatever you call that thing. Like, all the enchanted blades have unique ones to, like, differentiate all the swords, but Chihiro's on the intent is one that could easily be mistaken in a lot of different ways. But either way, we see that Chihiro's come in with this sword, if it's intent, if it's whatever. And as he comes in to almost try to slice off Kagiri's head, we see that Kagiri brings up the hilt of the whatever blade he's using, and we see that Chihiro barely cuts into it whatsoever, right? As we see that Ikora sees this, he's like, oh my gosh, what's going on here? But he looks over to his side and says like, huh, Iori, like, where did Iori go? As we now cut to the stairway of the school, like, of course, they were on a higher floor, so now they're going down the stairs of some sort, and we see that Ro has taken Iori and says, like, hey, you're coming with me pretty much, right? And Iori's like, hey, wait, what do you guys want, right? And Rose is like, hey, you're actually crazy, don't you know that? But I also love in this moment that Ro is thinking, of course, to Samura, as he's just thinking like, hey, like father, like daughter. I guess that's just how this sort of goes, which is honestly a bit of a funny sentiment, being like, okay, maybe that Iori is actually just as much as a hothead as Samura is also, right? Or I guess maybe you should be calling him Seichi, because that's his specific name, and like this is Iori Samura, and he's Seichi Samura, just to make it a little bit less confusing. But either way, we see Sumi, who is the female member of the Masumi. She's also here, and she's like, says like, hey, the seal's breaking down. They must have picked up a signal that way, but they definitely can't pinpoint her identity already, right? And Rose is like, but here's the thing, they already know that she's around here, right? But why is a seal breaking down? As I love in this moment that Iori just looks at Ro and just says like, oh, a kid? Of course, like, that's the first response that all of us have to seeing Ro, is just like, yeah, you're just a short guy. Like, you say you're an adult, but man, you look, I mean, you're like a foot shorter than Iori, or like not even like 2 feet. Like, Ro is like a very, very small guy, right? But we see Ro is just like, okay, well, that means it probably has to be something external. Thus the influence of Owl. Could that maybe be it? And he's like, but no, the girl doesn't have any memory of Samura, so there's nothing that could be trying to get rid of it, right? And we see that Iori's just like, what on earth is going on here? And she thinks to the whole thing of like, okay, 3 days ago, and she's like, no, wait, that can't be it. She thinks to Ikora's words like, hey, or maybe there's something bothering you. As Iori just thinks, what? Maybe all this time, there was something, it's like there was something important that I just forgot about. As she remembers the image of her holding hands with her father one more time, and it's just like, hey, Iori. And Iori just like screams out at this moment, hey, if you guys know something, please tell me. As Ro just thinks, oh, maybe her memory of Samura is completely sealed, but if unconsciously she is trying herself to break the seal, if unconsciously she is herself trying to break the seal. As Rose sort of comes to this conclusion, and then just thinks, hey, Mr. Samura, don't underestimate young people. As we get this little image of course, Chihiro and Iori being like the two young people that Samura has underestimated so far, who are acting a lot more stronger than they should be despite all of these situations going on right now. But Ro just is like, hey, we'll explain all of this later, but in any case, we know who the Hishaku are after. They are coming after you. And Ro then just says like, hey, sorry, young lady, but life is going to be a little bit different for a while. Starting now, you're under the Masumi's protection. And that is where we end this chapter of Kagurabachi. Now, at the beginning of this video, I said, while I think this is a very fun and good chapter, I do have a few issues with that. And honestly, My main issue is here in this final sequence. I mean, I really love the beginning parts of this chapter where we just get a focus on Iori going through day-to-day life. She sees the thing of like Chihiro on the television, and then we go to school where we see that Ikora is, who is sort of being that sort of negative fan in a sort of like sense of the word, I guess, where he's sort of like over-analyzing this whole situation and praising Chihiro for being this like anti-hero-ish of a character in this way. And I really love the dynamic that comes up between Ikora and Iori. I'm sorry, I don't know where those names are coming from there for a second. But just this moment where Iori's subconsciously trying to remember her father due to the influence of thinking that something has actually been off this entire time. And then we get to a sequence where, okay, now Kagiri's here, he's come to attack, and I love this moment where Ikora stands up like, hey, nobody's going to be doing anything about this, so I will. But then Iori steps in to be like, hey, I don't want you to get killed, you're going to get killed, but you know what, they won't kill me, showing it sort of like big balls to the walls action movement. And then, of course, Chihiro coming in is a very cool thing, and it now seems like him and Kagiri are going to get into a little bit of a scuffle. But it's really these last few pages where Ro really comes in. I don't know. I'm having a very hard time really enjoying him as a character. Like, so far, every time we've seen them, all of the Masumi together, like, I've honestly really liked Moku, and I've really liked Sumi, but Ro is just, I haven't really understood him fully as a character yet. And because of all of this, and because of just, like, the way he acts like he's better than everyone else, it's sort of this moment, I saw this brought up a lot online after I recorded my video on chapter number 60, which was, of course, where Chihiro is in the hospital, Shiba comes in, and then Roser just walks in being his own mini Samura self and just says, like, hey, it just comes in, sort of interrupts that situation, and I really like that chapter, but I heard a good amount of criticism after I recorded that video of, like, totally like, okay, Ro just coming in sort of ruins the whole atmosphere of the moment, and while that whole idea is really cool, of like, okay, he is the leader of the Masumi, it's just the way he acts better than everything else, and just, like, his final proclamation of, like, hey, Samura, don't underestimate the young people, I think it's cool, but I honestly think it'd be a bit better coming from one of these other characters who we know a bit more, like Sumi or Moku, instead of Ro in this moment. And Ro's whole thing of like, hey, sorry, young lady, but life's going to be different for a while, starting now you're under the Masumi's protection. I mean, don't get me wrong, I am very hyped for what will be happening next in Kagurabachi, because I'm like, oh, man, that's going to be really, really dope when we get more of, okay, Iori's are running away with the Masumi, who, while Chihiro is entangling with the Hishaku. I feel like the next sequence is going to be really, really awesome, but it's just this moment of, okay, Ro, I'm not really your biggest fan right now, and hopefully that'll be changing soon if in the series. Hopefully I can see him do some cool things, but just right now, Ro, you're just not really doing it for me, and that's just is what it is there. But overall, and with all of that, I just really, really like this chapter of Kagurabachi for the rest of all the parts, besides for, like, the last 3 or 4 pages where Ro comes in, right? But, I mean, this chapter doesn't really hold a lot of questions that need to be answered. Really, the biggest thing I'm wondering now is, okay, as far as Iori's mother goes, is she actually Samura's ex-wife? Like, what is going on with her? Does she know the whole situation? I'm honestly more interested in that than I am a lot of the other stuff we will probably be getting soon in Kagurabachi. But either way, great chapter, and I definitely did enjoy chapter number 62, titled Iori. But yeah, thank you guys so very much for watching this video on Kagurabachi chapter number 62, titled Iori, as I just mentioned. And if you did enjoy it, I've got plenty of other Kagurabachi chapter reviews up on the channel. They'll be in the description box down below. There's going to be an end card at the end of this video. And also, you can just go to the Glowplasma channel and just, like, check out all of my videos there. I do a lot of stuff mainly covering anime and manga related content. So if you guys like that sort of stuff, then hey, you may like the videos I produce. And yeah, I don't really have anything else to say besides that. So again, thank you guys so very much for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time for Kagurabachi chapter number 63. Again, this was chapter number 62, titled Iori, and I'll be catching all of you Bachi Bros next time. This will be Glowplasma 231, signing out.